Imagine a child born into slavery, weak, fragile, and unwanted by many. Now imagine that same child growing into one of the most respected scientists, educators, and humanitarians in American history. His name was George Washington Carver, and his story is not just about peanuts, as people often believe. It is about struggle, brilliance, deep faith, and a lifetime dedicated to serving humanity. This is the beginning of his extraordinary journey. George Washington Carver entered this world around the year 1864, during the final years of the Civil War in Diamond, Missouri. His exact birth date was never recorded because children born into slavery rarely had their lives documented. His father, a man named Giles, died before George was born, leaving his mother Mary to raise him and his brother James. But tragedy struck early. When George was still a baby, raiders stormed the area, kidnapping his mother. She was never seen again. The infant George and his brother were left in the care of Moses and Susan Carver, the white couple who had once enslaved their family. George was not a strong child. He was often sick and too frail to work in the fields. But his weakness became a blessing in disguise. While other children labored under the hot sun, George wandered the woods and fields, studying plants, flowers, and the soil beneath his feet. His curiosity was endless. He created a small garden of his own, and soon neighbors began noticing his gift. He could make sick plants healthy again. Farmers in the area came to the boy for advice, calling him the plant doctor. But George wanted more than just a nickname. He wanted knowledge. He wanted education. And in a world where opportunities for a poor black boy were nearly non-existent, that desire seemed almost impossible. Yet he never gave up. He walked miles to attend schools whenever he could find them. He worked odd jobs to pay his way: laundry, cooking, cleaning, anything that earned him a little money to buy books or food. Sometimes he went hungry, but his hunger for learning was stronger. He applied to schools, and again he was rejected because of the color of his skin. One college even accepted him, then turned him away once they discovered he was black. But rejection did not stop him. George believed, as he once said, that education was the key to unlock the golden door of freedom. Finally, in Iowa, his persistence paid off. He enrolled at Simpson College, originally to study art. His drawings of plants and flowers amazed his teachers, but one professor, recognizing his deeper potential, encouraged him to pursue science instead. She told him the world needed his gift in agriculture more than on canvas. George listened. He transferred to Iowa State Agricultural College, becoming its first black student and later its first black faculty member. At Iowa State, his genius began to flourish. He studied botany and soil science, that impressing his professors with his experiments. He discovered how to restore worn-out soil and make barren fields fertile again. He was a man who blended art, science, and faith in everything he did. Beyond the laboratory, he was also a painter, a pianist, and a deeply spiritual soul. He saw God's beauty in every leaf, every flower, every grain of soil. Then in 1896 came an invitation that would change his life. Booker T. Washington, the great educator and founder of Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, asked Carver to join his faculty. George could have chosen a life of wealth and prestige, working for powerful universities or corporations. Instead, he chose to serve the poor black farmers of the South, men and women still struggling on worn-out cotton fields, trapped in poverty even decades after slavery. At Tuskegee, Carver revolutionized the way agriculture was taught. He believed science should not be locked away in books or classrooms, but should serve people in their daily lives. He took his students into the fields, teaching them how to rotate crops, how to improve soil, and how to use alternative plants to build a sustainable future. His laboratory was not just a place of research, it was a workshop for hope. This is where the famous peanut story begins. While people often believe Carver invented peanut butter, the truth is different. He did not create peanut butter. What he did create was far more important. Carver discovered hundreds of uses for peanuts, sweet potatoes, and other crops. He developed peanut-based paints, oils, plastics, cosmetics, and even a type of fuel. His goal was not personal profit, but empowerment. He wanted farmers to see that peanuts were not just food, they were opportunity. And though he could have become rich by patenting his inventions, Carver refused. He believed that God gave him these ideas and he had no right to sell them. His words were simple: God gave them to me. How can I sell them to someone else? Carver's humility was as legendary as his brilliance. Despite offers of wealth from industrial giants like Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, he turned them down. He chose to remain at Tuskegee, living simply, wearing modest clothes, and dedicating his life to his mission. His purpose was never fame, never fortune, but service. He once said, "I want to be of service to my people." And that was the truth he lived by every day. By the dawn of the 20th century, George Washington Carver had already become a living legend. His work at Tuskegee was transforming the lives of farmers across the South. His discoveries were attracting attention far beyond Alabama, and his reputation as the gentle genius, the plant doctor who served humanity, was spreading across America. But this was only the beginning. His greatest contributions, his fame on the world stage, and the legacy he would leave behind, those were yet to come. By the early 1900s, George Washington Carver had already become a respected name at Tuskegee. His students admired him, farmers trusted him, and scientists began to notice his quiet genius. But soon, his work would carry him far beyond the fields of Alabama. Carver was about to become a national figure, someone whose wisdom would reach presidents, world leaders, and millions of ordinary people. Word of his discoveries spread across the South. Poor farmers who once struggled to survive on worn-out cotton fields began planting peanuts, sweet potatoes, and pecans. They were learning new ways to sustain their land, and slowly, lives were changing. Newspapers started writing about this wizard of Tuskegee, the man who could turn simple crops into hundreds of products. Carver's fame grew, but he never sought it. He lived in a small room at Tuskegee, surrounded by his laboratory tools, his sketches, and his plants. He rose early, prayed every morning, and believed his ideas came from God. He often said, "I am not the inventor. I am only the instrument God uses." This deep faith guided his work and his humility. As his reputation grew, invitations poured in. In 1921, he traveled to Washington, D.C. to speak before the United States Congress. Lawmakers wanted him to discuss the potential of peanuts and other crops for the economy. Carver arrived carrying a simple bag of peanut-based products, lotions, paints, oils, and even food items. Standing before powerful politicians, this humble man from Missouri gave a speech that captivated the nation. His soft voice, his gentle humor, and his undeniable brilliance won over the entire chamber. By the end, the lawmakers gave him a standing ovation. From that moment, Carver was no longer just a professor in Alabama. He was a national treasure. Soon, he became friends with some of the most powerful men in America. Presidents like Theodore Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, and Franklin D. Roosevelt all admired him. He advised leaders on agriculture and education. He even had a close friendship with Henry Ford, who invited him to his laboratories and discussed the future of bio-based fuels and plastics. Thomas Edison once offered Carver a high-paying job, but again, Carver refused. Wealth did not interest him. His heart was always with Tuskegee and the poor farmers he had promised to serve. Even as his fame spread worldwide, Carver remained humble. He wore the same simple clothes, walked instead of riding in luxury cars, and continued to live in his modest room. Visitors from Europe and Asia came to meet him, expecting a grand scientist, but instead they found a quiet, soft-spoken man who welcomed them with kindness. His discoveries with peanuts were extraordinary, but they were only part of his genius. Carver also developed more than 100 products from sweet potatoes, including flour, rubber, and synthetic rubber substitutes during wartime shortages. He believed nature held solutions to humanity's problems, if only people would listen. His philosophy was simple: use the earth wisely, waste nothing, and live in harmony with creation. Despite his great contributions, Carver remained a teacher first. At Tuskegee, he inspired generation after generation of students, not only with science, but with values of faith, humility, and perseverance. He taught them that success was not measured in money or fame, but in service to others. "It is not the style of clothes one wears," he said, "but it is simply service that measures success." In the later years of his life, Carver's health began to fail, but his influence only grew stronger. He received the Roosevelt Medal for his contributions to science and humanity. He was invited to the White House, honored by organizations across the world, and even became a symbol of hope for African Americans during a time of deep segregation and discrimination. His life was proof that greatness could emerge from the harshest beginnings. On January 5th, 1943, George Washington Carver passed away at the age of about 79. He died as he had lived, quietly, humbly, without wealth or possessions. Yet, the legacy he left behind was priceless. The man who was born into slavery, who lost his mother as a baby, who was rejected again and again in his quest for education, had become one of the most admired scientists and humanitarians of his time. After his death, President Franklin D. Roosevelt dedicated a monument to him at his birthplace in Missouri, the first national monument in honor of an African American. Schools, parks, and institutions across the country were named after him, and his story continued to inspire millions around the world. George Washington Carver once said, "No individual has any right to come into the world and go out of it without leaving behind him distinct and legitimate reasons for having passed through it." He lived by those words. His reasons were clear: his discoveries, his teachings, his humility, and above all, his service to others. Today, when people remember Carver, they may think of peanuts, but his true legacy is far greater. He taught humanity that greatness does not come from wealth or fame, but from using knowledge to lift others. He showed the world that even from the humblest beginnings, one person, guided by faith and perseverance, can change the world. And so the story of George Washington Carver ends not in sadness, but in inspiration. For his life is a reminder that no matter where we begin, no matter how heavy the obstacles, we have the power to rise, to serve, and to leave behind a legacy of hope.